Okay, this video is about government grants and the government funding. And it'll probably let me say a few more things about foundation grants, kind of is different from government grants as I talk about government grants. But government does fund things. Government funds a lot of things. It's very different than foundations, and so let's talk about that. Um, The government, if you ever go on grants.gov, you will see that there's a lot of different um, avenues through which funds come from the government. The different departments, like the Department of um, Health and Human Services, for instance, funds a lot of things that can be of benefit to nonprofits if you're the right kind of nonprofit to apply for a certain government grant. It can be good. Sometimes organizations rely heavily on government grants, and it's a great source of income for them, and an ongoing. A lot of times they will kind of be year after year after year applicants for something. I used to work for an organization that largely was dependent on a government grant, and we got it year after year after year and kind of got complacent about it. And I wasn't directly involved with the program that they were funding, but I was over that and other programs. And we were told, we were warned that it was going to be a different kind of application year, and that we needed to bring our A game. And so, I mean, we had gotten the training, and I assumed my staff appreciated the training that they got. And um, we got down closer to the wire, and I started looking at the application that they were putting together for the grant, and they were using old data. They were using data that was several years old, probably the same data they'd turned in every year. They were turning in again, and I was like, "Oh, we can't do this." So we scrambled to improve the application before the deadline, but the deadline came, we had to submit, and we didn't get the grant again. And that program actually had to radically change what it did because it no longer had that significant funding source. But government grants can be very helpful. There are very big differences between them and foundation money. Um, and so, I mentioned Health and Human Services, but the Department of Education, the Science Foundation, National Science Foundation, there's just a lot of different avenues through which the government gives. And again, you can go to grants.gov and see all the different kinds of grants that are available now or have been available in the past. It's kind of important to look at because they tend to come around again and again. So even though there may not be one open right at the moment, you might find one that works really good for you that will likely become open to apply to, at some month in the coming year. And you kind of have to be prepared for that, because usually when they become available to apply to, then you have like 1 month to get something turned in. So if there's something that you really want to go after, you kind of need to know it's going to be coming. You kind of need to be working on it in advance. In fact, I think the textbook might suggest you're starting a year in advance on these kinds of things. You're getting all your ducks in a row. You're getting all the sections that are going to be required for that application from the government application. You're getting all those things ready ahead of time, because when the window of opportunity hits, you don't have much time. So grants let you know, the government lets you know that they have grant opportunities through what they call requests for proposals, which is different from most foundations, although there are some foundations that also put out requests for proposals. And what that means is the government, or those few foundations that do it this way, but the government puts out kind of here's what we want to pay for. And let's just talk about some sort of emergency child care shelter. Let's pretend that the Health and Human Services wants to put out a grant opportunity for providers or potential providers of emergency child care shelters. So they announce that, they say, what kind of services that program needs to be offering, what kind of outcomes does that program need to show that they can satisfy. A lot of details about what they want in that. So if you were a nonprofit that was doing that work and their outcomes were not something that you weren't prepared to prove or show, and all their stipulations were ones that worked for you, then you might apply for that. And if your application then ended up being judged to be the one of the best, then you might get funding. You might get great funding, and they usually say they have $1 million that they plan to split 5 ways or whatever. It's usually all in the write up of the request for proposal, the RFP. So you kind of know what your odds are. And you also have to see, is this a regional offer? Is this just for your part of the country, or is this just for your state, or is this only for rural, as opposed to urban, or is this only for urban and not for rural? So you need to look at all that. But if they're only going to give out 5 across the country, and historically they get hundreds of applications for those 5 slots, your odds are not great. Doesn't mean you can't try. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try again and again, because it's a matter of scoring when it for government grants. Each of the area gets certain scores based on how well that section of the grant was done, how well it answered the questions, and you can get better at answering questions like they want, and you can score higher, or you can add stuff into your program so that you, in fact, are more worthy of that grant. So you'd look for the request for proposals, but you can, again, need to know when they're coming, because you need to be ready in advance. It's a very formal process. It's a very competitive process. Foundations can be competitive too. Foundation grants tend to be a whole lot less formal. You might be turning in 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 pages to a foundation, but government grant, literally, if you were to print out all the stuff that you had written for a government grant, it's practically a ream of paper. And then when you get a government grant, you have to satisfy it, which means, not just spend the money like you said you were, but you have to show that you're getting the outcomes that you said you were going to get, or at least that you're trying to, and if not, what are you going to do about it? There's all sorts of reporting that comes along with it, significant amount of reporting, and a lot of times with foundation grants, compare and contrast here again, they want to thank you. They may want an annual report. Just depends on the foundation. You need to know what the foundation's looking for. But when it comes to government grants, you can count on reporting. You can count on at least annual reporting, if not quarterly reporting. There may be even monthly things that you have to turn into the government while you have the grant, and sometimes even after the grant is over. So a lot of times when you get a government grant, you have to have the staff to satisfy the grant, not just the service staff, but the reporting staff, the staff that are required to to satisfy all of what the government needs from that. The good news is, if you are the nonprofit that's appropriate for a particular RFP, it can be a great source of funding for services and operations. Just really can. And again, I mean, if you're good at it and the government likes what you're doing, those organizations tend to get those government grants kind of year after year, and it really becomes a big part of what's making them successful in terms of being able to afford what they're doing. So I don't want you to necessarily shy away from government grants, but understand the challenges that come along with them. A lot of times, government funding will require some sort of match. Sometimes that doesn't have to be a funding match. It can be, you can show volunteer hours and calculate the value of that as your match, or other organizations might be cooperating with you, and you can show their efforts as match to your to the funds. So there's different ways that you might be able to handle that, but um, if they're looking for, they're going to give you 100,000, but you have to match 100,000, and you don't have 100,000 to match it, then that's really challenging. So just understand that. Um, and you just want to make sure, if you go after a government grant, that you're prepared to get it, because um, not just that you can do it, but that you want to do it. Because sometimes the way requests for proposal are written, the RFP is written, sometimes it just really changes your nonprofit, changes what you would were founded to do. Um, it's kind of like the tail wagging the dog. The dog is supposed to wag the tail. The nonprofit's supposed to decide what it is it wants to do. But in this case, the money, the funder, the government, is deciding what the nonprofit would do, because they're the ones that have the money. So you just want to make sure it's a good fit for your organization and for your funding need when you pursue a government grant. Um, I think that's pretty much it. Much shorter than the other one. Talk to you later.